I'm 95 years old. So with that span of time, you can just imagine that I remember President Aguinaldo all the way to President Duterte. And that's my advantage over most people in this land today, because I have seen history from the time of the Americans all the way to now. History was totally distorted to favor one group.
And it is unfortunately continuing. That is why exercises such as these are important.
Little by little, the truth will come out.
Well,
I'm glad that you have asked me to join this conversation so that at least we can somehow correct the distortions of history.
I am very grateful to you.
And I'm willing to challenge anybody here in this country to debate with me about the events.
We put this together really because of the mail that I have been receiving in my social media. And the millennials have a different approach, it seems, to the events of history, the history of your lifetime for that matter. And the millennials seem to want to know what it is behind the decisions that my father and the members of his government made in the time of the Marcos administrations. And so we thought the best, most authoritative person that we could find would be you, as you were not only in the middle of the action, as it were, but you were part of the decision-making process of many of the important events that occurred.
During the first 2 years, 3 years of martial law, you can open your window, leave your house, nobody will touch it. That's how peaceful the country was.
So it wasn't the typical country under military rule where you had tanks in the streets and you had soldiers pulling people out of their homes.
Of course, in the beginning we had curfew.
Yes, we had. Yes, I remember that.
We had to give grant passes.
So, Tito, the account you're giving as to the approach, the build-up towards the declaration of martial law and the actual implementation of it and the enforcement of the military rule is very different from what we are hearing. And for you, Tito, for example, I mean, I hear it too, but of course, it's a different. You come from a different perspective. What is the biggest fallacy that the young people now are being fed about the reasons behind and the actual events of martial law?
They claim that we killed a lot of people, and that's why when I was interviewed by someone some time ago, I challenged her. Name me one that we executed, what we killed other than Lim Seng.
What was the accusation? Was that the summarily
that
executed?
We had 70,000 persons arrested, which was not true. Maybe if they will include the people who violated curfew and the jaywalkers, maybe you can reach that number.
But anyone who was
people can go out at night. They can go out and fish. They can go out to farm, they can go out. They were free, in fact. Of course, if you are a member of a rebel group or a warlord or who violated the criminal law, you have to be arrested, whether you have martial law or not.
It sometimes, I'm mystified sometimes by the lack of understanding of the simple fact that if you attack the government, you attack the state needs to defend itself.
Of course.
And that's why fighting would break out. And that's
Name me one person that was arrested because of political or religious belief during that period. None.
They were all for
Name me
criminal
one
acts.
person that was arrested simply because he criticized President Marcos. None.
But there were a lot of critics still very, very vociferous and very speaking out against him and his administration, even during the martial law, when the country was under martial law.
Jovi Salonga, for instance. Oh, he was involved in the Light the Fire movement and many others. There were very few were arrested, and they were released. They were inconvenienced for a while, but they were released. The late Pepe Jokno, he didn't want to be released. I told Pepe, just sign anything and just get out of here. I told him.
All of that seems to have been lost in the accounts that we hear now.
Well, I cannot blame the so-called millennials when they were born in 1980, no?
Let's say,
Yeah. Well, they did not know anything. They just, what they know is what they read or heard.
And it is...
They read something that was based on inaccurate facts. During martial law, there were no massacres like what happened in Benjola during the supposed democratic government of Cory Aquino.
Maybe you could explain to these young people the approach that you took to governance. Kasi Tito, I remember when I was young, I would listen to my father's speeches and lagi kong naririnig the phrase nation building. And I have not heard that phrase since 1986. And it does not seem to be the priority or the guiding principle in governance anymore.
You mentioned about nation building, which was a battle cry of the Marcos government.
That's right, Tito.
That was all included in the national plan that was prepared by the brain trust of your dad. And that covers infrastructure, agriculture, energy, and education. And that's why when we started with agriculture, he established irrigation canals, especially in the north and in many parts of the country. And then he went into electrification. The national electrification that we have started with your father. He started the geothermal sources of energy in the country today, which is helping the economy. And then later on, as a part of his national plan, education of the people. And that's why he created the system of state universities that expanded the educational system in the country and made education cheaper for the people. And so many others. He introduced land reform. That's why he was very conscious of the sale of Hacienda Luisita during the Garcia administration. This was a part of his land reform program. Proposed the establishment of a nuclear plant, which was derailed by Cory Aquino because of their anger and revenge against the Marcos administration.
Dito you mentioned the lobbying of the big landowners, the hacienda owners, and for the exemptions from the land reform. But I think the term that around that time was we were beginning to hear my father speaking out against the group of oligarchs
Correct.
that were controlling many segments of the economy
Correct.
and were not helping or supporting the national program. Arise.
Oligarchies existed during the time of your dad and even before that. And even now, they are still around. They control the economy, they control the agriculture because they have all the haciendas, they control the communication, they want to control even government. If you will remember, you have to talk to interest groups to be able to run for public office in those days. Controlled Meralco, they controlled the media, they controlled the newspapers and the radio, many facets of the industry. The industrialization of the country was controlled by the so-called oligarchs of the land.
This is one of the elements that pushed the government towards the declaration of martial law
Yes.
in 72.
Apart from the fact that indeed there was a need of it, because what was the social condition of the land at this point? We were dealing with separatism in Mindanao. We were dealing with a very strong communist party. We were dealing with the onset of drugs menace in the country. We were dealing with landlords, political warlords over the land, and the high criminality in the land. And what was our instrument of power at that point? We had only less than 50,000 in the armed services. That included the constabulary, the army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. And our weapons were carbines and guns of World War II vintage.
World War II vintage.
Against the Belgian FALS, the Kalashnikov or AK-47 of our adversaries.
I think nakakalimutan dito the extent of this warlordism and the size of the private armies.
The size of firearms in the hands of the civilian population was much more than the capability of the armed forces of the Philippines and the constabulary. When martial law was declared,
there was an
we
amnesty.
harvested about 600,000 guns all over the country of all kinds.
As opposed to our 50,000
Less than 50,000 to be exact. I think we had only about 48,000.
uniform services.
Yeah.
So that people do not realize the extent of the warlordism because I don't think we have the modern equivalent.
Apart from these factors that I told you, their political organization, especially the political organization of the Communist Party of the Philippines, was extensive. They have a united front that was very strong. Until now, that united front is operating through the NDF. They covered labor, the universities, academe, farmers, fishermen, women, teachers, all over. They infiltrated even the church. And we did not only have the armed elements of the Communist Party and the separatists, we have the Christian Liberation Army. Even the church was involved.
So in that time, the government assessed that the largest security problem was the communist insurgency.
Correct.
And that is that the martial law was really a response to that
Correct. One of the reasons why President Marcos finally declared martial law, very few people will remember this now, was because there was already a working coalition between the Liberal Party and the New People's Army, the New Communist Party of the Philippines, headed by Sison at this point. And President Marcos realized that the country was too fragile with a very limited military capability to contain the problem.
But this is something new. I did not know there was a formal agreement or between a political
My
party.
God. Ninoy Aquino and I met in the house of Ramon Silay in Urdaneta Village. He was my neighbor. Paul Aquino is still alive. He was present in that meeting. He was the one who reported to me that he had a meeting with the leadership of the Communist Party and they were discussing a coalition government.
But this was together with the Liberal Party at the time?
He was a member of the Liberal Party.
But the Liberal Party hierarchy was part of this arrangement? Or?
When President Marcos finally confronted them with information, they refused to talk to President Marcos.
I didn't proclaim martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I asked the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country. Now, let me say this. The opposition was strong. And they were members of the Security Council, and somehow they had adopted a resolution which required that there be a unanimous vote for the armed forces to be able to move. And therefore the armed forces was immobilized. At the same time, I asked the opposition party to come and join me in a coalition government. I offered one half of the cabinet. And of course they laughed at me and said, why should we join you? We're going to take over the government. By the time you are through with the exercise, you're dead.
How was the evolution of the thinking within the administration to finally come to the decision that my father declare martial law in
Because
72?
it started when they invented the Jabida massacre. I say invented because until now I've not heard of anyone who complained about anybody being massacred in Corregidor. No one. The only one who was who appeared as a member of the trainees, supposedly the Muslim trainees in Corregidor, was that fellow who swam across the Corregidor to Cavite, which was the invention of Montano and Ninoy Aquino. And because of that political outburst of Ninoy, we lost Sabah. And then that Jabita massacre, injured the political stature of the Marcos regime, followed by the Plaza Miranda grenading in 1971. And because of that Plaza Miranda, I was a victim. I was a candidate afterwards for senator, and I lost because we were blamed for Plaza Miranda, although that was the handiwork of the Communist Party. The disorder that was brought about by them, by the left especially, was too much to bear by the country at that point. As the Secretary of Defense, I had to fight both the Muslims in Mindanao and the Christians. And then at the same time, there were also datos who rose against the government. The group of the MNLF were sponsored by Malaysia because of the limitations imposed by the government, the regime, or the political situation in the country before martial law. The hands of the president was limited, so he finally decided after he was re-elected to impose martial law. He asked me to study his powers under the Commander-in-Chief provision. I was Secretary of Justice at the time.
The declaration and the implementation in the very first days. I was not here. I was abroad studying. And I remember that I just got the news from a phone call. My father had mentioned it previously, and he said that things are getting pretty bad. And he had spoken about the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. And after that, he was talking about he had hoped not to declare martial law. But I got the news that
your dad asked me to prepare this study in December of 1969 because he was anticipating that he will finally have to face the music. When we finished the studies about January of 1970, At this point, the president transferred me to the Department of National Defense. And then he waited from 1970, 71. He allowed the election of 1971 to go through, where the nation was experiencing violence and disorder. Because he did not want to declare it. He was hesitating to use his commander-in-chief powers. Until finally, in 1972, he decided.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
So it's not remembered very well, or it is not well documented, or it is not well disseminated about how large and how severe the problem was of the communist uprising and the we still see the fighting in Mindanao, but it's over a different ideology.
We were able to arrest all of the leaders, including Jose Maria Sison, Juliet, the wife, and several of the leading commanders of the Communist Party, and emasculated the organization until later on, when we had, after EDSA, Cory restored the problem because he released all the leaders of the Communist Party, and then, including Father Balweg of the Cordilleras, and then brought back Miswari from
Saudi
exile to revive the MNL problem.
And was there a reason stated
That
for
is where
why
I
they
parted
did it?
ways
With
with Cory.
Oo. In the face of all of this, I think we come to the question: how did you think Cory did as president? Did you think she wala kami
I
dito,
must
so
tell
hindi
you
namin
that,
alam masyado yung mga detalye.
You know, Bongbong, having been involved in the cabinet of President Marcos, and I'm not saying this to denigrate anybody, I was dismayed when in my first cabinet meeting with Cory, he did not make any decision. I'm sorry to say this, but I realized in that first meeting that I had in that cabinet, that the president that succeeded Jordan did not know anything about governance.